Good day, everybody, and welcome to another installment of Inside Reality, where we call out hypocrisy, including our own. And today we're going to talk about, in my view, and I think Jimmy's going to agree with some of this, the unwillingness of the average, typical American citizen to actually make sacrifices for the overall good of community and country. I just don't think people are willing to do that. I'm Jeffrey Candelaria. This is Jimmy Tran. He's the co-host, and he actually produces the show. Thank you again for doing all those behind the scenes configurations. We drop the show every Thursday or Friday. Please like, share the show. I think what makes us a little different, Jimmy, is, we're not like two people that are mutually admiring each other and we come up with a topic and we're both like, oh yeah, we both agree, like most of these dumbbells do. We disagree. I change my mind, as do you sometimes. And I think that's really healthy because we use a dialectic approach where I look at something from one place, you look at it from another. And sometimes, I'm not so recalcitrant that I just hold a position. Like I used to not think this country was systemically racist. I've changed my mind. Anyway, Jimmy, how you doing today?
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm excited. Yeah, this is an interesting topic for sure. And you're right. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that, people can share information and stuff. And so I like this, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to get this type of show out there, because we don't have a lot. One, we don't have a lot of these type of shows, but two, I think that a lot of people like to kind of get away from controversy. And so I mean, we do touch on controversial topics that may not be popular, or actually even, I mean, to be fair, some of that in today's environment is even dangerous to some degree to share this, so that I think is important. I mean, I was just watching a show, and it was a business kind of investor type of show, or it was a business kind of podcast, but the guest on the show was an investor, and they were talking about Elon Musk and how he was just this darling, within one side of the political aisle. And then when he started to actually do something to try to help, because he was persuaded that we were in big trouble. And so he wanted to do something to help. And he was not only demonized, but people that, like, for instance, owning Teslas were getting their cars vandalized, and the dealerships. I mean, it was just, it tipped over to a whole different level that we've never seen before.
Well, I think you make a good
political
point.
Side.
I tend to be, I'm a confrontational person by nature, so it doesn't bother me to take on a topic. But even the other day, and again, this is Inside Reality. Today, we're talking about how much willingness or reticence does the average person have about sacrificing to make their community better, or the country better. And most of the time when we talk about sacrifice, it's usually economic sacrifice, right? So that's what we're talking about. I'm arguing that I just don't think people want to sacrifice. And even though they talk about it sanctimoniously, they're just unwilling to do it. And we're going to talk about the big, beautiful bill and how it's going to impact millions of Americans adversely. But at the same time, some of the overarching themes within the bill, because it's an omnibus bill, so there's so much complexity to it. But I mean, to Trump's credit, in one regard, everybody talks about cuts. We have a $37 trillion deficit. This is going to add another $4 trillion to that deficit over time or something. Yeah. But at the same time, there are some cuts built into it in terms of these prodigious institutionalized bureaucratic apparatus like Medicaid, right? That's a huge monster. Yeah. And he's trying to at least make some cuts there because it's not sustainable, just like Social Security ultimately isn't. But people are going to be affected. So we're going to talk about that, So everyone says, oh, we need to do cuts, the Democrats especially. But the Democrats never talk about actually how they plan to do it. And the Republicans, I'll give them a little bit of credit, even though this bill has a lot of negative aspects to it. there is a sense within the construct of the bill to make some cuts to some of these huge, prodigious mammoth programs. And he's also trying, again, there's politics here in everything, right, Jimmy?
Yep.
But millions of Americans are on Medicaid that shouldn't be. Let's be honest. Come on, man. Further, millions of Americans that are able-bodied and sitting at home watching TV all day or porn or whatever the hell, they're getting their little check that we pay for, us taxpayers, and he's trying to eliminate some of the people gaming the system. So there is some of that, but unfortunately, people will suffer in particularly rural areas because those hospitals won't get matching Medicaid funds. Doctors won't be there. In New Mexico, for example, we live in a provider desert, meaning we don't already have a lot of doctors and nurse practitioners here anyway. The bill is going to probably accelerate that in states like New Mexico. But on the other side of the coin, if you don't do anything about the deficit and gaming the system, then it's just hypocrisy, right?
Yeah.
It's just absurd if you don't actually do something about it.
I think that's part of it. I mean, there's several elements, right? I mean, one is that I never like these big omnibus bills because it's so easy for various interest groups to sneak. I mean, and there were a few of those kind of like they call them the poison pills or whatever it is that really could potentially create some issues, And so, I mean, they're snuck in there very, very small, and because it is being worked through the Congress, that means that this becomes law in the
codified
in the proper sense.
Yeah, it's not an executive order.
It's not an executive order where it just goes away after. Not only goes away, but actually, executive orders have a different element to them, and that we can definitely talk about it. The mechanism of executive orders are not properly. I mean, if you look at the way that the Constitution lays it out, the executive orders only pertains to actions within the executive branch, because that's how it works. Meaning that if you work for the executive branch, then the dictates of the president becomes your mandate, if you will, of action. Okay, you don't get the vote. That's the part that people don't understand. And if you violate that, that's absolute treason. And so forth. Now, granted, if the order is unconstitutional because of the way that it gets interpreted properly, so that it is defined unconstitutional through the Supreme Court, if it gets challenged, then it's a point in which you're safe in terms of not following those because if it's unconstitutional.
Remember,
so that's
let's try to stay focused on the sacrifice element.
But it's
the
tied
average
together.
American.
It's tied together because understanding this or the lack of understanding of this really is what I think is contributing to this sacrifice. Now, the economy is important and so forth, right? And then I think that this is also tied into what might happen in the world, when it comes to like Iran and so forth. Because I know that some of the concern about getting into a war with Iran, of course, is the nuclear threat of that. Okay, where if they do indeed have the nuke, that means that they may be willing to use it if it's a last resort where they're cornered, they see no other out, and in order for them to feel like they can win, they'll launch and so forth. And so when that happens, of course, you've got this cascade. I mean, but the main difference between Iran and like Russia or China or any of the other places is that the mutually assured destruction isn't a real deterrent because of the ideological position.
Well, it worked during the Cold War.
It worked during the Cold War because the Russians.
But again, how does this relate to what we're talking? Again, this inside reality. We're talking about an unwillingness of the average American to actually make sacrifices for the greater good. I don't think people are willing to do it. They talk about it. Everybody talks about it very sanctimoniously, but no one's willing to actually do it.
Well, here's why this is tied together.
I should say no one. I mean, some people are.
if we get into an engagement with Iran in a way where, you know, becomes combative in a bigger way where it escalate, right? That means that our oil prices will go up, which means that all these other things that we have will go up, right? So it's one of those things where you're trying to balance between the economics and the safety. And I mean, Iran has sponsored, we know, you know, thousands of various, you know, terrorist, you know, attack. I mean, they were part in it in one form or another. Now, I'm not saying that it's all their fault. I mean, obviously, our CIA and some of these other groups have had their hand in the manipulation and stuff like that. Part of the, you know, but at the end of the day, because we're trying to avert a collapse of our economy or whatever, we'll do what we. And so this is part of that sacrifice, in my opinion, right? Like, for instance, when the COVID thing took place, right? There was this battle between those that were like, well, you should, you know, sacrifice, you know, your freedom so that we can have healthy, you know, and save grandma and all that kind of stuff, right? And so it was one of those things where, on one level, I agree with you that there's that lack of willingness to sacrifice, but I think that the type of sacrifice and the area in which we're willing to sacrifice isn't always consistent, and that to me is where
I guess I'm using the word sacrifice within the context of the deficit that exists. The $40 trillion deficit, whatever, 37. The big bill is going to add another $4 trillion to that. But there are elements within the bill that address.
Agreed.
We have to make some sacrifices as a country, as a population, in order to address these mega institutions like Medicaid, okay, like other, like Social Security. It's not sustainable. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that in 7 years Social Security is going to run out. Okay, so when folks are on Social Security, I'm on Social Security, right? It's an income I rely on to some degree, right?
Yeah.
But at some point, younger people who are going to assume those privileges, benefits, which they paid into and become eligible for Social Security, there may not be sustainable funds to provide that, right?
Yeah.
So the question is, am I, as a current beneficiary of Social Security, and younger people who are not yet, are we willing to have a conversation to say we have to raise the age threshold where you become eligible? Or two, would you be willing to have a 10% decrease, Jeffrey, and the population that will inherit Social Security in 7 years? And am I willing to make that sacrifice? And are they? And nobody talks about it like that.
Yeah,
that's what
okay,
I'm saying.
That's fair. I mean, that's
those
one
are
area.
And those are the Republicans and the liberal losers who always frame everything as an emotional issue instead of a calculation, like I just clumsily tried to make it, articulated, right? Social Security as an example. And all I'm saying is, and maybe the topic is more like, why don't our leaders talk about sacrifice in non-emotional terms and be convicted to it? And I'll give Trump a little bit of credit, because in the bill, Medicaid is an example where he tried to do that. He's trying to make some cuts and say many people are gaming the Medicaid system, and even if you are eligible and you're able-bodied, you have to contribute 20 hours of something a week or a month, right?
Yeah.
But that's a sacrifice. But yet all the liberals are like complaining about it. Oh, well, why should people have to, why should people have to earn the benefit if they're able-bodied? I haven't heard one freaking Democrat get off their lazy butt and say, you know what? If you are able-bodied and you're on Medicaid, maybe you should contribute in order to enjoy that benefit.
Well, that's the thing. That's
a sacrifice.
Right? Yeah. No, I think I don't know if that's a sacrifice as
sure
much
it
as
is.
it is. Well, no, if you do something to get something, that's not.
But they're not sacrificing now.
Yeah.
And the liberal Democrats are not arguing for that effort, I guess. I'm using the word effort, contribution, and sacrifice interchangeably. I haven't heard one lazy donut-eating liberal who has power and influence say, you know what, maybe just maybe, if you're able-bodied, what's wrong with making that effort to enjoy the benefit that the rest of us are paying for?
Yeah.
Because remember, it's Medicaid. It's not Medicare.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. Let's not.
You talk about that.
Know. Well, you seem to know a little bit more than I do. I mean, I know too.
Well, I'm Jeffrey Candelaria.
What's the difference between the Medicaid and Medicare? So let's start
Medicare are populations who over time paid into that program. So when they become eligible, 65, I think, they enjoy that benefit. Well, that's Medicaid are people that not necessarily pay into the program, yet the rest of us have to pay for. It's like the SNAP program, right? You know, these people getting this free food. I'm not saying they're eating bone-in ribeyes every night, but I'm just so sick of the rest of us taxpayers just like blindly always paying for these programs that populations who are able-bodied should make a contribution to enjoy the benefit.
Yeah.
Right? If you're able-bodied and you get SNAP, and SNAP is the free food thing.
Yeah.
You know, the food stamps, and you get Medicaid and you get some housing benefit, get your lazy butt out and do something, man. Yeah. That's all I'm saying is make a contribution to enjoy the benefit that the rest of us had paid for.
Yeah.
And I haven't heard one single Democrat, Schumer and the rest of these losers, say out loud, what's wrong with, isn't that reasonable? If you're able-bodied to enjoy the SNAP benefit that we pay for, taxpayers, the Medicaid benefit that we pay for, the taxpayers, the housing subsidies that we pay for, the taxpayers, what's wrong with saying, you guys, get off your butt? I know you're economically, stressed, what have you, but what's wrong with 20 hours a week, making some effort, contribution, sacrifice to enjoy the benefits that the rest of us have provided to help you with some semblance of quality of life? What's wrong with that?
Let's define the specific type of sacrifice then that you're because that's also important if we can quantify some of those things, because yes, the Medicaid is for people that are, unable to pay because their economic situation is down.
Right.
I mean, that's the welfare. And then SNAP is the same thing versus Medicare and Social Security. Aside from the disability one, Social Security is designed for people that are of a certain age, to provide them with some type of income and so forth. I mean, these are all the safety social nets that are put into place,
for citizens.
For citizens.
Huge number. It's an enormous.
I mean, Biden definitely provided.
We have to pay for those people.
Yeah,
I didn't sign up for that. Yeah. What I did sign up for. People want to come into this country, do it. Go through the process, and if you have an economic stress or a true disability as a taxpayer, I have a moral ethic enough that I'm willing to do that. But for all these people that came here illegally, I'm not cool with financing their lazy ass. And two, what about all the people that are gaming the system? Yeah. I have members of my own family. I'm ashamed to admit that game the system.
Yeah, I hear you.
And these are members of my family. I'm sure the FBI is going to look me up here. But
and we encounter these all.
I have no respect for that. I have no respect for that.
I hear you. And
that's what I'm talking about,
Okay, well, let's
those populations sacrificing to say, no, I want to do the right thing. I want to work 20 hours a week in community service in order to feel like I'm making an effort or a contribution to enjoy, the food stamps and the Medicaid that I am getting, that Jeffrey and Jimmy pay for, and the rest of us.
There's multiple elements here. One, I think, is part of it is that we live in a convenience-driven culture, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think that most people have lacked to understand is that convenience is an expensive proposition, and it doesn't belong to those of us that can't afford it. So what I mean by that is that, like, for instance, even eating in a restaurant, right? I mean, I'm not wealthy, and I mean, I make very little and so forth, and so I'm very careful in how I spend my money because I'm trying to be responsible. Okay.
Yeah.
So the fact that I have to go to a restaurant and then have them make my food and then I have to pay for that, but also pay for the service. I mean, I've seen people that are like flat ass broke, if you will, right? They go to like a convenience store is where they do their shopping. Okay. Yeah. Because of various reasons. They don't have a vehicle or they don't want to walk down to the grocery store where they pay a lot less to get a lot more so that they don't end up burning.
But they don't have transportation or something.
So because we do, so this is why I think it's important also to talk about this, because we live in a very blended society. And when I say blended society, I'm talking about the wealthy and the poor among us are all together into this blended, and
let me just say this because
hold on, let me finish.
But let me just say this. It's real interesting. Access. You and I are friends, right?
Yes.
But my income is probably, and again, I'm not being judgmental of you.
Sure.
But my wife's and my income is because I think the reason we're doing the show is we're calling out naked reality.
Absolutely.
And I'm not a hypocrite. You're not, or we try.
You're trying not to.
Our income is probably 5 times more than yours.
Probably.
Yet we live together. You and I are friends. I think that's what you mean by a blended society.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's a really good point.
Because in the olden days, the lords and the people that are wealthy do not mingle. I mean, we still have some of that as part of, various clubs and so forth where you can't get in because the entry fee is $10,000. So unless you have $10,000 to spare, you wouldn't have access to that. So this is one of the things that I've learned over the years. Yeah. For instance, I went to university in Irvine and I went there primarily.
My dog's over there. Go ahead. Sorry.
I went there primarily because of the education that I was able to get. But obviously, I also got into like USC, for instance, and the difference was tremendous in terms of the level of education I got, but more importantly, the type of access that I would have gotten if I went to USC, for instance, right? Versus where I went to a UC school, very different in terms of their alumni network, right? I mean, the net worth but when I did an evaluation, I was like, you know what? I can't see myself $40,000 in debt after I'm out of college. Yeah. That was, versus like, I think it was like $5,000 or $8,000 in debt in a public school system. So I chose that because I made an economic decision when I made that choice. Now,
but how does the blended society relate to the sacrifice topic that we're talking today?
Well, because
again, this is Inside Reality, folks. Today we're talking about, in my view, the unwillingness of the average American to truly make a sacrifice or a contribution or an effort to enjoy the privileges that we have.
Well, I think that part of it has to do with the fact that I don't think that people realize that, or they don't recognize that they should make a sacrifice. Okay, so that's the first part. Like I said,
no one's asked them to.
One is no one asked them to, but two is that, like, for instance, here's an example. Just going back to my example of this poor individual that is on welfare, on food stamp, right? And they're going in and they're buying stuff from the convenience store because they can. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, they're paying 30% or more on that same item. In some cases, even double the cost of what they would if they went down to the grocery store.
Plus, the inventory is limited too.
Correct, and they get a smaller quantity. That's why the price is higher. But the point is that they're able to do that because we don't discriminate, and so you see that it becomes a challenge there because it's like, okay, well, you're free to your freedom to choose to do that. Now, of course, that means that they're going to burn through that money that they got, and then of course they're going to need more, or they're going to need to do other things to try to game the system.
Almost paradoxical, almost.
So exactly, that's part of what I see is the problem. Is that when we make convenience something that can be accessible by everyone. I mean, like if you're poor and you don't have a car, okay, then you need to figure out a way to get to work or get to where you need to go. I mean, it's not incumbent upon the rest of us to have to do that for you. And this is where I think, for me anyway, I look at my situation and say, okay, I can't afford this because of my economic situation. Not because I don't want to spend the $5 for Uber to get me over there, okay? But because there's a trade-off, time and money, okay? At the end of the day, that's what it comes down to, time and money, okay? And so if I don't have the money, That means that I have to now give my time in order to cook the food, in order to walk to the store, whatever it is that I need to do in order to accomplish what I want to get at. Okay. But
there's a lot there. But
that framework is not the way that people see it, because I can afford that, because again, the system the whole thing, like for instance, you can go to McDonald's, which is again a restaurant, but they've made it so that the food, I'm going to put that in quote because, you can question whether food, but they make the food so cheap that, you can spend $5 and get something to eat that will kind of fill your stomach. May not give you much nutritional, but it fills your stomach. Now, if you do that for every day on and on and on, now all of a sudden, what do you develop? You develop health issues. Okay. Yeah. We've seen that. The guy that did Supersize Me, I don't know if you're familiar with this.
Yeah, a documentary. We're going on a little bit of a tangent, though. Come back to the sacrifice and the willingness to, as a citizen, make a contribution. Where are we at with that?
I think they're all tied.
That you're talking about.
My point is that they're all connected. This is why I bring it up, because it's not a tangent on its own. Okay. I'm bringing it in because it's, to me, this is the connective tissues, if you will, that brings everything together. But because if people don't feel the need to sacrifice, they won't.
Let me make a point then. Why is it that I'm such a hard ass about people having a sense of self-reliance, accountability? I grew up in a blighted area. Yeah. I went to an elite school in high school, right? And I remember, to your point, really interesting point, my grandfather was lower middle class. We had dirt. We didn't have grass, dirt, which really bugged me. That's why I value grass where I live now in my little suburban area. And yes, I'm a suburbanite, and I'm very happy to be a suburbanite, which, to your point, I'm separated from the poor, just like the feudalistic days. Yes. I'm living in in the lordship area,
of course,
in aristocracy, and all the serfs, like you say, are down there. And I'm being honest. You're right. We pay for the privilege to be in a aristocratic area.
Sure.
But I grew up in a serf area, right?
Yeah.
So when I went to this elite high school, most of the people there were making 7, 10, 12 times, 15 times the income that my grandfather was making, because he raised me, because my mother was dead and all that. And instead of reviling, these billionaires or whatever, millionaires in Albuquerque,
they work hard.
I aspired to be like that because I wanted that quality of life.
Yeah.
But it was also concomitantly, I'm a good looking guy, I dated nice girls. I was ashamed to take it to my house.
Sure.
Where I lived in the surf area.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
So you make a really good point that we lived in such a blended society that sometimes those of us that are, I'm not an aristocrat, but I'm in the beginning of that. I'm in the beginning of that aristocratic world.
Sure.
My wife and I really make an effort to really show appreciation of that.
Sure.
But I'm still a bit of hard ass for the populations that either are too lazy, don't engage in critical thinking, have never been taught ethics or never been taught mathematics, budgeting, any of that. And maybe to your point, going to a convenience store where they're spending 30% of their food budget, where if they went to a grocery store, they could save on that 30%, plus have more selection, but maybe they're constrained against going to a grocery store because they don't have transportation. Those are very complicated issues, nobody talks about it in those terms.
Correct.
Particular political leaders.
Yeah.
They just say, oh, the poor, we've got to feed them. They don't dissect, like what we're trying to do in Inside Reality. What does that actually mean? Access to food. Why are they paying more? They don't have transportation. And I think you made a really number of really salient points in that regard.
And I'll take it further on that, right? And that is that, like you're saying, because the sacrifice isn't necessary, therefore it's not going to be done. That's really, to me, where it comes to. Okay. Because just like even example, I don't have a lot of money, right? Because I chose to be an entrepreneur. So, oftentimes that has a phase in which, but that's my sacrifice, right? In order to make that leap to go up higher economically, but I had to make that.
You took an economic risk.
Correct. Yeah. But not only that, I'm also in this situation where I have to make a choice because I want to be healthy, right? So I live healthy, I stay healthy, I make healthy choices with my food and so forth. So and so when I'm observing what's going on, I don't spend my money in these convenience stores because they don't have the stuff. Now, if I'm traveling and I need something because I didn't get it because I forgot to pack it or whatever, right? Then I make that, I have to, or I just don't eat or whatever. So those are the kind of dynamics and thought that I don't think the general public. So when you're talking about sacrifices, that's part of it. That
that's another really cogent point because I'm in my 60s. I'm fit because I make sacrifices. Absolutely. I went to a July 4th party the other night with some really good friends of mine that I went to grade school with, and he had burgers, hot dogs, all the traditional cliche, food items, which I appreciate. But instead of, putting a cheeseburger, making it double and throwing mayonnaise and mustard, I made a burger wrap out of it.
Sure.
With romaine lettuce, minus the cheese with a little bit of mustard. And I didn't eat any of the chips, but I ate 2 of those lettuce wrap burgers that I constructed. And, my friends were like, well, don't you eat bread? I'm like, well, no. I said, I'm very judicious and very circumspect about what I am sacrificing
absolutely
great taste for my health and my fitness.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about. I think that's what we're both talking about. The individual making those choices about doing without something in order to have a greater good. In this case, God, the universe willing, my health.
Yeah.
I wanted the sesame seed bread and the double cheeseburger they were eating,
Yeah.
I wanted the hot dog bun, but I chose not to eat bread. I was a little bit, here's another thing. I was a little bit ridiculed for it by my buddies because I have a dominant, strong person. I said, you know what? You're a slob. Eat more cheese because that's how I am, right? But again, it's a personal sacrifice that demonstrates a willingness to think about that the idea of giving something up for a greater good. Well, and I don't know where I learned that actually. I'm not sure.
Now let's take that thought process and go a little bit further.
Got about 12 minutes.
Well, the greater good is a very big thing, right? I mean, this is a general term we throw around, right? There are many layers of that, right? And so for you, for instance, you're willing to sacrifice how you eat and what you eat in order for you to get and maintain the health and physique that you.
Plus, I like looking good in clothes because I have an ego.
Yeah,
I'm good. This is inside reality. I'm being completely honest.
Yeah.
I like looking good in clothes and so forth. So beyond the fitness and health, it's also there's an aesthetic element there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying is that because we have not been challenged, and part of it that to me is part of why we're seeing this is that okay. You get to do this and there's no sacrifice, there's no cost, right? And so the cost becomes paid later. Okay. Meaning that if you don't pay the cost today in terms of the health, wellness of food and so forth, you pay later with, basically a sickly body, a diseased body, and of course being overweight.
And other people have to pay for it sometimes.
Well, that leads to that, right? Yeah. Again, this is why I said that all of these things are all compounded because they're all connected together. Okay. Right. And so one of the things that I love about JFK when, from his speech, right? I mean, there are a lot of things I didn't like, but there are some things that I do your
country,
like,
all that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. To me, that's sacrifice. That's a call in the public, which is why actually Trump did something similar. If you really think about it, he said that don't become a panicking, right? I mean, he tweeted that. So meaning that there's a hard time coming, but we can't panic and think that the world is going to just disappear, economically and all that because of the trade war that was ensuing. Right. I mean, he, in his way, prepared and shared that, and I think that he didn't get credit for that part of it because
that comes back to my original point about the big beautiful bill.
Sure.
I don't think Trump isn't that articulate. I think he should have done a better job of saying within this big bill, we're asking certain populations to make some sacrifices.
He does.
Well, I don't think he communicates it. I don't think he communicates.
But anyway, that way.
But he's the only guy, even though he bloviates and he's got a hyperbolic ego and all that. Once you look beyond that says basically, don't rely on government to solve all your problems.
Bingo.
And I have never heard one other than Kennedy, and I think RFK, perhaps in 67, 68, when he was running, talk about that type of sacrifice, the relationship between you, whoever you is, and government.
Yeah.
Because government is all of us paying for this thing called social programs and all that. I have not heard one Democrat that has power and influence, particularly in this godforsaken state of New Mexico, that says, you know what, there are certain populations that are lazy. Yeah. And maybe certain people are fat because they just don't have any sense of self-discipline. Yeah. And there are people that are gaming the system.
Absolutely.
And maybe some of those populations we shouldn't pay for. Yeah. And it's going to be hard and maybe it's tough, but maybe there's an ethical, moral, self-reliant element that people need to start talking about more. Absolutely. I wish if a Democrat did that, I'd probably vote for a Democrat.
Yeah.
But I've never heard, other than the Kennedys in the 60s, in the early and mid 60s, late 60s rather. And they were, by the way, they were both assassinated. And maybe it had something to do with talking about that.
Yeah. Well, that's part of it, right? If you go across go outside your sandbox, you're not going to, be allowed, and that's part of it, right? Because that means that because this is part of being mature. I mean, think about it. As we talked about in the last episode, in terms of our government, the way that our governmental system is set up. See, the part that I made and said that there's a king, and the king is the monarchy of the executive branch. That's the kingship of our. But here's where I didn't get into and I didn't explain is that we, you, I, those of us that are, well, to an extent, we have the privilege of becoming in that realm. Now, obviously, you're born here, you get that, you get to be part of that executive. If you're not born here, so there is still a little bit of the what I call.
What about the 20 million illegal aliens that came here?
No,
they're participating in
I mean, that's
thing called the machine of America.
Yeah, but that's a bastardization of the system, right? That's not what the system was set up. Here's why I say that. Because we have things called law that was in place. And this is where I think I'm working on an essay on this, and I'm going to share a little bit of what my thesis is on it. And that is, we have the separation of powers and the separate, where the government has. So all these people complaining about all these illegal, right? Okay. There's one simple way if they're willing to do it and able to follow through on it. And that is, okay, let's say we make a law that all these people are now legal and boom, they're done. And we pass it in the House and pass it in the Senate. And then it goes, of course, to the executive, and the executive will agree, okay, this is a good enough plan, to solve this problem. Let's make them all legal. Okay. You could do that. The reason why they're illegal in terms of a status is because we have a law that says that this is not allowed. You see what I'm saying? That's why Obviously. They are illegal.
That's self-evident. That's obvious.
It is self-evident, but it's not the way that we're talking about this. Okay. So this is why I listen to Trump. I try to listen to the nuance and the detail. One of the things he says is that, like, for instance, an example, when he was up against Hillary in his first term, and he's like, he was
6 minutes.
She was complaining about he was not paying taxes and all that stuff. And he's like, well, no, I pay my taxes. Yeah. The ones that I'm required to pay. I'm not going to give you more money than is allowed. If you don't like what I'm doing, then change the law. I'm just following what you've given me.
Well, not only that, but that idiot Clinton, you know how many jobs he created? Do you know how much wealth he created in his life?
Yeah. That all aside, I'm just making a point that he's, to me, this is how I've interpreted his actions, right? Is that, again, he has this discipline. Okay, this is what the law says, then I'm going to do it. So, right, there's a difference between legal and ethical and moral, right? I mean, those are three very different, distinct. There are things that you can do legally that may not be ethical or moral, and then there are things that you can do that are legal, moral, and ethical all together. Right. I mean, and those are all the different stratas, and our laws are kind of in that mix. Okay, and so again, going back to this blended society, we live in a society where all of this stuff is at play and blended. And so the sophistication that is needed for somebody to recognize this and break it down and then consciously deciding for themselves.
Well,
right,
it comes down to
important.
the nuclear family, man, or the
That's
absence.
one part. That's a contributing factor.
I learned ethics and morals by my grandfather, who never
Sure.
said anything. He personified it.
Absolutely.
He had a work ethic. He tried to do the right thing is. That can be a whole different show because what's moral for me may not be moral for you.
Sure.
But there was this general sense of the golden rule and all that he sort of lived by, but he never talked to me about it. And I was having a conversation with a therapist the other night. I'm not in therapy, but he happens to be a therapist and a good friend. And he was asking me, well, why did you love your grandfather? Why did you become Jeffrey from a blighted area? My mother died, all that. Nobody talked to me about sex. I didn't have any discipline from anybody. I did whatever the hell I wanted.
Sure.
Why did you become, and I have to be careful I say this, but how did you become successful or whatever that means in this society, which I guess I am. Well, I don't know, to some degree, right?
Yeah.
And I said to him, I wanted to support my grandfather. I didn't want to disappoint him.
Yeah.
And I wanted to show him love without actually saying it out loud because it was too difficult to say it.
Sure.
And I wanted him to be proud of me.
Of course.
But it comes back to what I said, the ethic of the family, the father, the mother, the parent, the authoritative person that's guiding and raising you.
Yeah.
I think it's gone to shit. I shouldn't say that. I think that's gone to hell in this country.
Yeah.
Where is the authoritative governance of the child rearing in this country that attempts to introduce ethics and morals and call it the golden rule and optimizing who you are and sacrifice and self-discipline? Yeah. I don't think that's there.
Well, that again, all that goes back to the participation trophy thing. Okay, that to me is the cultural underpinnings of all of this. Because when you start moving that standard down, because you're trying to get everybody to have the same outcome, you have this problem. Okay, that's just the bottom line. If you look at psychology, you can ask any psychologist who's worth their weight, or even just a mediocre one, even they'll say this, and it'll be very, very evident that when you don't have the expectation, okay, then nobody's going to rise to that expectation.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Okay, and that's the problem. So we are living in a privileged society in a general sense. Okay.
Well,
because
I think it's also it's the death of meritocracy.
Correct.
The death of celebrating achievement. That's why I have this Saturn rocket here, because it took 6 years, 7 years of all these resources and this focused
and the
scientific effort and sacrifice to go to the moon, man.
Yeah.
And the death of meritocracy, the death of celebrating achievement, and also the unwillingness to talk about, like you said, if you want to be great at something, some people are actually going to be.
Yeah.
Do your best.
Yeah.
Do your best.
Correct.
Do your best. We don't challenge ourselves that way anymore. It's almost like, oh, that's a privilege of the white elite to say that.
Exactly.
Which is so dumb. I'm not white. I wasn't born elite. You're not white. You're not born. But we both, on Inside Reality, I think we accept the beauty of excellence and striving for excellence. Would you agree with that?
I agree.
And it has nothing to do with white privilege in terms of anybody can celebrate that ethic of celebrating meritocracy.
Well, and I think that, to me, that's what I feel.
2 minutes.
When we talked in the past, when we talked about it, the American culture, right? To me, that is the American culture that we've lost. Okay.
Yes. I would agree with that.
Because if you look at it, I mean, we have a system of government that allow for and create in its best attempt to try to level the playing field so that anyone who, excel and willing to and want to put in even the elite among us, like, for instance, we hear about, like, for instance, we love the fact that we can watch Michael Jordan soar through the air and dunking, right? I mean, all that. But what we don't talk about...
I'm not a Michael Jordan fan, but I get the point.
But it's not about his fan, but his work ethic. Anybody who's ever seen him behind the scene, okay, and all his they can't argue with the level of work ethics that this guy.
It's like Evander Holyfield too.
Exactly. I mean,
trained like no one else. Absolutely.
Exactly. I mean,
Walter Payton used to climb mountains.
But that's the sacrifice,
right,
for greatness that they're willing to go. Okay, that's what it comes down to. And,
okay, we got to conclude. This is Inside Reality, and back to the rocket here. Yeah. Remember what Kennedy also said, John Kennedy. We choose to go
not because it's easy
to the moon, because it's hard.
Hard, exactly.
We all of our fat donut-eating leaders and people of influence don't teach that ethic anymore
because they are willing to sacrifice that excellence and that future. That's their sacrifice. You follow? We are the sacrifice for their legacy or whatever it is that they're trying to, meaning that they want to pound their chest and say, look, we saved the poor. We made, that's to me what has happened is that we've swapped out.
Again, we'll talk more about this. This is really fascinating, but a lot of people are poor because unfortunately they just in a sense they chose to be. I hate to
some
say
of that. Yeah. But there's also, I mean, in today's world,
because
there are so many ways.
Going to a job 7 days or 5 days a week, waking up at 6 a.m. Like, remember in one of my shows, I talked about my banker friend. Yeah. He was a white supremacist leader guy, whatever. But I admired his work ethic because, he made $300,000 a year, lived in a nice house. And your friend Mike, he's such a this. And I said, well, you know what? The guy gets up every day at 6 a.m. and he's there till 7 p.m. That's sacrifice.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's the part that people don't see. Like all these people criticizing billionaires. Well, maybe they earned it. Well, maybe they earned the right to have a yacht. Well, anyway, I'm Jeffrey Candelaria, and today's show was about the willingness or unwillingness to sacrifice or make a contribution to enjoy the privileges we have. Thank you, Jimmy. This is Inside Reality. Like and share the show, right?
Yep.
Thank you.
Hold on. I want to share just one story. It's actually
I got to go. So.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. So this is an experiment that was done where they take children and they give them 2 marshmallows and they say, okay, you get to eat one of them and you got to wait for the other one. And if you do not eat the marshmallow, then I'll give you 2 marshmallows. So it's kind of like that. All right. So they give them one and they say, if you don't eat it, I'll give you a second one. And there are some that won't eat it and then some that eat it right away. And what they did is that they also tracked them after that experiment, and they found that the ones that were willing to sacrifice to get the double actually was much more successful in life than those.
That's life.
And that's the reality.
That's why some people are lazy. Some people are poor. Some people don't get mad or unhealthy.
So if we want to make America great again,
they the immediate marshmallow, and we're unwilling to have the second marshmallow to make a sacrifice. Exactly. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Inside Reality. We'll see you next time.
Week. Please like and share. Yeah, leave your comments. We don't have to agree with you, but we'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.